Every empire in history believed it would last forever. Every single one of them was wrong. There is a pattern buried deep inside the story of human civilization, one that repeats itself across continents, across centuries, across cultures that never even knew the others existed. Empires rise, they dominate, they seem unstoppable, and then, almost without warning, they begin to crack from the inside. This is the story of the most powerful empires the world has ever seen, and this is the story of how they died. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of one empire, but the beginning of the idea of empire itself. It is 2334 BC. A man named Sargon of Akkad has just done something no one on earth has ever done before. He has conquered not one city, not one tribe, but an entire region. Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, what we now call Iraq. For the first time in recorded human history, one ruler controls a vast territory stretching hundreds of miles. He calls himself King of the Universe. He wasn't far off. The Akkadian Empire becomes the world's first true empire, and in its rise it writes a blueprint that every empire after it will follow, whether they know it or not. Conquer, centralize, expand, extract, and eventually collapse. Sargon's empire lasts about 180 years. Then drought hits, crops fail, barbarian tribes move in from the north. The whole thing unravels in a generation. Sound familiar? It should, because that story, almost word for word, will play out again and again for the next 4,000 years.
Fast forward to the 5th century BC. A new kind of empire is born. The Persian Empire, under Cyrus the Great, stretches from modern-day Iran all the way to the edges of Greece and India. At its peak, it controls nearly half the world's population. Think about that. Half the human beings alive on Earth are living under one flag. Cyrus is clever. Unlike rulers before him, he doesn't just conquer, he absorbs. He lets conquered people keep their languages, their religions, their customs. He even frees the Jewish people from their captivity in Babylon, an act so extraordinary that the Bible calls him a Messiah. But his successors are not Cyrus, and that is where the trouble begins. By the time Darius III takes the throne, the empire is bloated, bureaucratic, and brittle. And in 334 BC, a 22-year-old king from Macedonia crosses into Persian territory with an army of 40,000 soldiers. His name is Alexander. In just 10 years, Alexander the Great dismantles the Persian Empire entirely. He marches all the way to India. He wins battle after battle after battle, never once losing a major engagement. His men worship him. His enemies fear him. But here's the thing about Alexander the Great, and here's one of history's most brutal lessons. Empires are built by great men, but they cannot survive without great institutions. When Alexander dies in 323 BC at just 32 years old, probably from typhoid fever, possibly from excessive drinking, possibly from poison, there is no plan, no successor, no system. His generals tear the empire apart like wolves over a carcass. Within 50 years, everything he built is gone. Now we come to the empire that more than any other still haunts the modern Western imagination, Rome. If you had stood in the Roman Forum at the height of the empire around 100 AD, you would have seen something extraordinary. Roads stretching 50,000 miles in every direction, aqueducts carrying fresh water to cities of 1 million people, a legal system sophisticated enough that echoes of it still exist in American law today. A military machine so precise, so disciplined, that it conquered Britain, North Africa, the Middle East, and most of Europe. At its peak, the Roman Empire controls 70 million people, about 21% of the world's entire population. It feels eternal. The Romans themselves believe it is eternal. They call it the Eternal City. They build monuments designed to last 10,000 years. And then it falls. Not in a single dramatic moment, not in one catastrophic battle. Rome falls slowly, the way a great tree falls. First, the roots weaken, then the branches thin, then one storm finally brings it down. Historians still argue about why Rome collapsed. Here's what we know. The economy became too dependent on slave labor. The political system rotted from within. In one single century, the empire goes through 50 different emperors, many of them murdered by their own guards. The military, once a model of discipline, becomes a mercenary force, loyal to whoever pays best. And at the edges of the empire, barbarian tribes, the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Huns, push harder and harder against the borders. In 410 AD, the Visigoths sack Rome itself. It is the first time in 800 years that a foreign enemy has entered the city. The psychological shock is shattering. By 476 AD, it's over. The last Roman emperor in the West, a 16-year-old boy named Romulus Augustulus, is quietly deposed by a Germanic warlord. No great battle, no dramatic last stand, just a quiet end to the greatest empire the Western world had ever known.
But the story doesn't stop there, because while Rome crumbles in the West, something extraordinary is happening in the East. In the 7th century AD, a new force explodes out of the Arabian Peninsula with a speed that shocks the world. Within 100 years of the Prophet Muhammad's death in 632 AD, the Islamic Caliphate stretches from Spain to Central Asia, a territory larger than Rome at its peak, conquered in a fraction of the time. The Islamic Golden Age that follows is one of the most remarkable periods in human history. While Europe sits in its so-called Dark Ages, the cities of Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba are centers of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. The scholars of the Abbasid Caliphate preserve Greek and Roman knowledge that Europe has forgotten. They invent algebra. They calculate the circumference of the Earth with stunning accuracy. They build hospitals. And then, in 1258 AD, the Mongols arrive. The Mongols are the wild card of history. Under Genghis Khan and his descendants, they build the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching from Korea to Hungary. They are the empire that breaks empires. The Mongols sack Baghdad so thoroughly that, according to some accounts, the Tigris River ran black with the ink of destroyed books. But the Mongols, too, cannot hold what they conquer. Their empire fractures into competing khanates within 2 generations. Their descendants convert to the religions of the peoples they conquered. The conquerors become the conquered. Which brings us to the last empire on our list, the one that shapes the world you are living in right now, the British Empire. At its peak in 1920, Britain controls 24% of the Earth's total land surface and governs 412 million people. 1 in 4 human beings on the planet lives under the British crown. It is the largest empire in the history of the world, period. The British don't just conquer territory, they export systems, legal systems, financial systems, railway systems. English becomes the global language of trade, science, and diplomacy. The map of the modern world, its borders, its conflicts, its alliances, is largely a product of decisions made in London by men who had never set foot in the places they were carving up. But the 20th century changes everything. 2 world wars bleed Britain white. The colonies begin to demand what Britain itself had always preached: freedom, self-determination, the rights of man. One by one, the pieces of the empire break away. India in 1947, Ghana in 1956, Kenya in 1963. By 1997, Hong Kong, the last major colonial possession, is handed back to China. The empire that once controlled a quarter of the world shrinks back to a small island in the North Atlantic. So, what does it all mean? Here is what the pattern tells us across 6,000 years of history. Every empire falls for roughly the same reasons. Overextension, the reach exceeds the grasp. Inequality, the wealth concentrates at the top until the bottom collapses. Rigidity, the system cannot adapt to a changing world. And always, always, the corrosion from within, long before the blow from without. Empires are not defeated by their enemies. They defeat themselves. Their enemies simply walk through doors that were already open. We look at these empires now and we see ruins, museums, footnotes in textbooks. But in their time, they were the entire world. The people living inside them could not imagine a world without them. They thought what they had built would last forever. And there is one more lesson in all of this, perhaps the most important one. Every generation believes it is different. Every civilization believes it has finally solved the problem of its own survival. History has a long memory, and history does not forgive the arrogant.